Welcome back to Stranded in Pittsburgh. Nick and Nate without Ethan once again. Nate's laughing, but it's to mask the pain that Ethan just can't seem to string together multiple appearances in a row, and I think it's really starting to take its toll on me. And Nate, it looks like it's the same case for you.
I mean, come on, he missed the Michael McHenry interview. Now he's missing this show. Big Pitt-Notre Dame preview, talking Steelers Rams. So he's missing a lot of content, but I guess we'll let him go for this one.
Yeah, we'll let him off easy. It's been a week covering a lot of high school stuff, getting his name out there as only he can, posting wonderful videos on his Twitter previewing the games. And we say that as a joke, but honestly, he puts out good content all the time. So Ethan, we love you, and hopefully you listen to this one. If you do, send me a text with the word bacon in it, and that's how I know you listened. And if not, then we know you're scum who doesn't even support his own show. And for new viewers, you probably already tuned out. But anyway, excited to have you back. As Nate kind of touched on, we're going to talk about the Steelers, talk about Pitt-Notre Dame, and what the hell is going on with the Penguins. But we'll jump right into what puts butts in the seats, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Very weird win over the Los Angeles Rams. I missed the beginning of the game, caught the last possession of the first half where they scored the touchdown. That's they being the Rams, and then got to watch the second half. But Nate, the win, even though it looked like they improved in a lot of ways, the win's kind of been overshadowed by how the Rams lost the game more so than what the Steelers did towards the end of the game to get the momentum swung in their favor. What do you make of that win?
I mean, overall, I think we saw vast improvement in that second half, and especially from Kenny Pickett. The offense just looked the way it should. I mean, what a lot of people saw in the preseason is what we saw in that second half for the Steelers. And it continues to beg the question of why can't they do that all game long? I mean, Pickett looked much better, had a lot more zip and touch on the ball. His timing was really good with a lot of the routes they were running. Deontay Johnson back in the mix. I mean, I think opened up things for George Pickens, who ended up on the day with 5 receptions, 107 yards. So I think the offense, again, they show these glimmers of hope, but they can't put it together through 60 minutes. So, hopefully they can take a lot from this in that second half and move forward. Defensively, again, the Steelers played relatively solid. Minkah Fitzpatrick was pretty much all over the field. TJ Watt with the huge interception to start the second half, and the first play set up the Steelers offense. Honestly, if it's not for that play, who knows if the Steelers start rolling offensively. They get their first rushing touchdown of the year, Kenny Pickett. Then they add 2 more rushing touchdowns on the year behind, who would have thought Dan Moore leading the way on a couple of those runs, had a much more, solid game from him as well. So I think a lot of good improvements and talking points from that second half. First half, a lot left to be desired out there. Again, the offense struggled, but Brett Maher missing a field goal and an extra point, left the window open for the Steelers. And if he doesn't miss those 2 field goals, that game's a lot closer right there at the end. That spotting that I'm sure we'll touch on is a much bigger factor.
Yeah, that spotting is a little more of a sensitive subject if those field goals were all made. But yeah, you hit on all the main talking points. No rushing touchdowns all year. They fire off 3 in the second half with 3 different guys, I believe, scoring all of them. Deontay Johnson came back. That's something you touched on last week, and his impact was immediate. Some really long receptions. And one of the storylines of the game was the taunting penalties that Pittsburgh was receiving that were really poorly timed. Not like there's ever a good time for those things, but we saw George Pickens, we saw Najee, we saw Deontay Johnson. All of them were kind of running their mouths. A few times there were flags, one basically negating a pretty nice Pickens gain. Today in press conferences, interviews, and what have you, Tomlin kind of said that it was more of an issue of they needed to feel out the referee corps from that game. Najee said they were a little too loosey-goosey. In layman's terms, in Nick terms, that's the term we'll use, loosey-goosey with the flags.
Right after though, I'll just want to touch on that whole comment. I was listening to the post-game show after the Steelers game on the radio, and Tomlin was in his press conference, and he said with all those unsportsmanlike calls, he said he'd rather tell his team whoa than sick them, which I thought was an interesting thing. Instead of telling them that, hey, get a little bit more amped up, instead of, he just had to reel him back in a little bit. So he'd rather have his team fired up, and that's where they cross the line. So continue.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it's a weird thing because we've heard all the time how Tomlin needs to discipline these guys more. and that he tries too hard to be everyone's friend. I'm not saying those are my words, but I mean, you've seen some of the egos running wild in this locker room since Tomlin took over a very long time ago now. But it's interesting to see him kind of take this route. I think it's a route a lot of fans maybe didn't want him to take, but when you say it, the point you brought up, you want to see these guys play with some fire, play with some passion, and maybe there were a couple incidents where it's like, really, did we need to do that there? But what do you take away? Did you think it was too much? Did you think it was too little?
At times, obviously, you don't want to take those penalties because if it's a critical situation, you just can't have that happen. Um, I think there's ways to avoid it, but I think maybe, the receiving core in Pittsburgh has had a lot of interesting characters over the past, half decade to decade. And Pickens obviously has brought in his own energy. And then I think Deontay Johnson was just fired up to be back out there. I think that's part of the reason, but they do need to dial it back, I think, a little bit. I mean, because in the end, I mean, it's a 7-point game. I mean, those penalties could be huge and very costly if those aren't taken care of.
And one of them, I'm not going to attribute it to the wrong one. It was either Pickens or Johnson. I can't remember which, but they're doing it right in front of a coach. And again, I can't remember if it was Tomlin or someone else, and there was nothing done. There's no hesitancy from whatever player it was to be like, oh, damn, coach is right there. I better not do this. But as a fan, they've struggled this year, and you kind of like to see them playing with a little spark under it. But then, even watching from the couch or from the stands, you have to kind of go, okay, you should really stop now, because that's a thing that they like to flag, the taunting penalties, and you have to know where that fine line is. Say something quick and get out of there. Don't get up in their face and start pointing, because I think when the gestures get added to the mix, I think that's where they really like to throw the flag. And so I think it's just a matter of, you want to see some of that from your team, but also you have to know where the border is, and you can't cross the border. But moving on, they'll play the Jaguars this week. Jaguars are what, 6-2, 5-2?
5-2.
5-2. Yeah, 5-2 and top the AFC South. This is gonna be a tricky game, which is a weird thing to say about the Jags. I still can't mentally get them out of the Blake Bortles era, which they beat Pittsburgh in a divisional round playoff game with Blake Bortles, but we won't talk about that too much. But Nate, on paper, what do you make of this matchup for Pittsburgh?
Well, I think, this is going to be another tough game. Trevor Lawrence has, played a lot better than his rookie season, being one of the better quarterbacks in the AFC. And I think he has the receiving core and the ground game to get it done. So he has a lot of great weapons around him. Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley back. Also, Travis Etienne on the ground. I mean, one of the top running backs in the nation, or in the country, in the league. Thinking college terms right now.
No, you're
thinking the Clemson duo there. But anyways,
you're excited for what's ahead too, for our next topic.
But Etienne, I mean, he's third in the NFL in touchdowns, 7 touchdowns, fourth in rush yards. So I mean, we've talked about, with Cam Hayward not in the middle there on the run defense. I mean, it's struggled at times. So that's going to be huge to see how the Steelers can, match up against Etienne. But this offense is going to be a big test. And we've seen, I mean, even last week, we saw the Steelers going against a pretty solid offense, especially in the pass game. And I thought they did well. I mean, besides a couple big Puka Nacua plays, I mean, he was dominant. I mean, finally got to see what he was like, all the hype around him. But they kept Cooper Kupp to 2 receptions on 7 targets. So I think in the pass game, they did pretty well. So I think that it's going to be a big matchup. The Jags offense versus Steelers defense. We saw Joey Porter Jr. make a couple plays against the Rams. So some of those guys are going to have to really be in the mix. But offensively, again, just touching back on the Rams game, I think the one promising sign for the Steelers, they were 3 for 3 in the red zone. Prior to that, they were 2 for 7 all season long. So I think finally getting, not only did they score on the ground for the first time this year, but also they were 100% from the red zone. They looked good from the red zone. The blocking there on the ground game was good. Pickett made smart decisions. So I think that's another thing looking forward to is how can they continue on that trend of being solid in the red zone and, offensively take from that second half of the Rams game and go against the Jaguars secondary that's not all that good either. So, it's going to be an interesting matchup. And I think it's one of the more overshadowed matchups of the year in the AFC. I mean, at least at this point in the season, no one knew that what the Steelers were going to be. And no one really knew that the Jaguars were going to be this good. I mean, beating the Bills, they've had a couple big wins, but in terms of the race right now, early on in the season, this is a huge matchup in the AFC. I mean, a 5-2 team versus a 4-2 Steelers team. This is a big win for whoever can pull away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the main talking point after that promising second half is, can they put together a complete game this week against Jacksonville? And I think a couple of the other points you hit on were things I wanted to mention. ETN, obviously, I think is going to be one of the biggest storylines in this game. We talked about it last week, just how depleted the Rams running back situation was, and Henderson shows up and has a really solid game. The run defense for Pittsburgh has been a really soft issue all year long. And then you mentioned the receiving core. That's a very talented receiving core they have in Jacksonville right now. Ridley, I believe, had a pretty quiet game against the Saints on Thursday, which is another storyline of itself. The Jags had a pretty long week, long rest, I should say, and they're going to be well rested coming into this one, making the road game maybe a little bit easier. But the other thing is the Jags let the Saints back in to that game. They built a really solid lead, and it kind of looked like everything was just going to get phoned in till the end, kind of. And then we saw the Saints come back and tie it up, and then they were a dropped ball in the end zone away from potentially sending that game to overtime. And the Steelers, they're 4-2, and I don't know if you know this or not, but it hasn't necessarily been pretty. It hasn't been Pittsburgh doing anything crazily impressive to get to those 4 wins and 2 losses. But they're a team that if you make a mistake, they're going to find some way to scratch and claw its way in front and pull out a win, and it's not going to be pretty. But if Jacksonville leaves the door open like they did against the Saints, I think Pittsburgh could really do some damage to them here. But I'd prefer to see Pittsburgh play 4 quarters of football, getting back to the main point. I'd like to see them put it all together and not leave us scratching our heads for 3/4 of the game going, what happened to what they were doing last week? And then again, miraculously, Kenny Pickett puts it all together in the 4th quarter. The playbook gets a little more spread out. They need to play a complete game. And I don't know if I believe that they'll do that this week, because I think Jacksonville's pretty damn good. But I think it'll be a close one regardless, Nate.
Yeah, and in terms of predictions, Jacksonville 2.5-point favorites coming into Acrisure Stadium. The one thing, if the Steelers are going to win, as we mentioned, we need to see 4 quarters of offense from the Steelers. The Jaguars are 31st in pass defense in the NFL. So it's a great game for Pickett to exploit that and get going, through the air. I mean, he has 1 game in his career of 2 touchdown passes. So if any game is the time for him to start rolling, it's this one versus the Jaguars in terms of passing. But I don't think Jacksonville makes those mistakes that they did against the Saints. I think that long rest, as you mentioned, is going to help them, and I think they come into Pittsburgh with a 30-24 victory over the Steelers. And again, until we're proven otherwise, I don't know if the Steelers offense can play a full 60 minutes.
Absolutely. And I think my prediction is going to be pretty close to yours. I'm going to go 31-20 in favor of the Jaguars. And you might be asking, is there anything in addition to what we've been saying? Here's some sabermetrics for you right here. When my wife and I watch the games, the Steelers are 4-0. When Kayla, my wife, has a terrible towel in hand, they have not lost. San Francisco, I didn't know where it was, so we didn't have it. Second week I gave it to her, they won. They played Houston. I think that was a few weeks later. She was doing some stuff around the house. We had a busy weekend. They lost. Didn't get the terrible towel out. Every game this year, she has had terrible towel in hand. The Steelers have won. And you're like, Nick, please shut up. I'm getting there. We're not going to be able to watch this game, or at least not the full thing.
Oh, no.
So that means, unless we're going to a family function with terrible towel in hand, which you wouldn't put past most people, it's going to be a rough one for Pittsburgh. But that might be my biggest deciding factor in this one. Hopefully anyone found that amusing at all. But we're going to move on now to, I gave my score, right?
Yeah,
31-20. Yeah, there we go. There we
go.
go. We're professionals. We're professionals, Nate.
I'd love to count up our predictions. I have no idea where we stand this year.
I have no clue. I can go look. That'll be a task only I should have to go back and withstand.
Or we make Ethan, since he's not here.
Or we could do Ethan.
It's his homework for the week.
It would be fun. He's got to send me that text, and he's got to give me our records. He could totally lie about our records, and I want to go double check them too. So just putting that out there. Anyway, Notre Dame coming off of a bye. Pitt coming off a loss, and what I've dubbed as slide gate. I don't know if anyone else has used that. I'm sure someone else has. We'll talk about that right now. And Nate, be very careful about what you say about this slide because we will get attacked if you say the wrong thing. So with that thought floating in your head, what did you think of the slide towards the end of the Wake Forest game?
I read some things and it's, they're not wrong, but I mean, well, this is the same thing to go with the whole deal with Kenny Pickett spotting at the end of the Steelers game. Why can't there be the technology to show the specific spotting of the football, just like, you can track how fast a running back is or how far, balls thrown through the air, like, that type of statistics and measurements. Why can't you have that with the spotting of the ball? And this one's tougher because it's all about where did Christian Veer start his slide? And it's tough because part of it comes in because the Kenny Pickett rule from the Wake Forest ACC championship game a few years ago. And Veer did look like he started his slide just a half inch too early, and that cost him the game. Cost him the spot. Didn't cost him the game. There was a ton of other factors that Pitt, fell in this one, but it's a tough spot. Veer, I mean, it's a redshirt sophomore. He'll learn from that to just run out of bounds. You're gonna have, 4 more plays at least to take time off the clock and punt again. So I think the call was right. As disappointing as it is for Pitt fans, he did look like he was starting to get ready for a slide, and the rule book, that's, as soon as you start your slide, and even if it was a yard behind the line or at the line, he still was right there, and he should have just continued to run for the first down instead of sliding early. But it's something you'll learn from. I mean, he's a young quarterback, and that's what I know Pat Narduzzi had talked about. So tough one. I mean, Wake Forest went on to score there with 9 seconds left. So, I mean, but there was a lot of other things that could have happened in that game that Pitt didn't do well.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there, which is something I say every time you talk. I think we should probably make a jar for it, similar to a tip jar at this point. There were people saying he takes 2, 3 more steps before he initially slides, blah, blah, blah. It looks like he's a yard short and that back leg starts to bend a bit. And I would assume, based off what I've read, that is where it's considered to be beginning. It's really close. And just to add on to what you said about him not needing to slide, I do agree that that's something that where he would make a better decision as he matures. But you're putting yourself in his shoes. You have the potential to win this game in his second ever start. And I mean, you don't want to make a costly turnover and take contact you don't need to have. So I think he's like, okay, I'm close, I'm safe, I'm just going to slide now. And he elected to go for that rather than potentially commit a turnover. And that's just something he's going to learn, is that he needs to be trusted in that situation to maybe make the smarter play and just run towards the out of bounds marker behind that blocker he had right in front of him. Nate's dog agrees. But anyway, we asked last week if Pitt can make a bowl game. Now the answer is pretty confidently no. But that doesn't mean they're not going to want to ruin Notre Dame's fun. Notre Dame lost 2 games already this year. The Ohio State one was debilitating, and then the Louisville one was putting salt on the wound for me and my Notre Dame faithful here. But the Irish, I think, are starting to hit their stride. They beat Caleb Williams and USC. I think they have some phenomenal skill players on that offense, including Sam Hartman, who's older than I am, to put things into perspective about eligibility in college football. But between him, Mitchell Evans, Estime, excuse me, and I just think that they're going to pose a really big challenge to this Pitt team, and I think they will walk away with a win in this one. But Nate, what are your takes on this game?
I mean, so far this season, Pitt has fared pretty well against number 14 teams in the nation, beating Louisville and Veer's first career start. But Notre Dame has just always matched up really well with Pitt. They have controlled the all-time series by a far margin. I don't know the specific record on that, but I mean, as of late, they've won 3 straight, absolutely dominating Pitt 45-3 in their last meeting. Now, Kenny Pickett was hurt that year. That was the COVID year. There was like 5 people in the stands. So, I mean, not really to look at much on that game, but the last time Pitt traveled to South Bend, they only lost 19-14 against the number 5 team in the nation in Notre Dame. And every time Pitt plays them, I mean, Notre Dame's always within the top 15th ranked teams in the nation. But for Pitt being a young team, I think this is going to be a tough matchup. with the veteran presence, as you said, Sam Hartman now with Notre Dame has transferred in and has played really well. 18 touchdowns so far this year to 3 interceptions. So he's played extremely well. The 2 losses, put aside, Notre Dame with that big win against USC, I think is going to help them, down the stretch of their season. After their loss to Louisville, that was, a lot of people thought maybe that could be a hiccup in the road for them, and it was. But they responded nicely against USC. They took care of business, and they're showing that this is going to be a really tough matchup for Pitt. I think just the size and physical prowess of Notre Dame has always been an issue for Pitt, and reason being why they've really struggled against them all time. So I think that's going to be the key in this game is Notre Dame's just more physical. I think Audric Estime, I mean, he's a big back. He's a bully coming out of the backfield. I mean, he's tough to take down, and I think he's going to be a huge difference maker in this one.
Yeah, I agree. Earlier when I said Estime, I've all day, even preparing for the show, I said, you're going to talk about ETN and then Estime, and the odds are you're going to butcher one of their names because you're thinking of the other, and that's almost exactly what happened to me earlier. But yeah, I think, for Notre Dame, they're always going to be in the favor of all the voting people. They always end up very high ranked, and for good reason. They're always very talented. But for a team that's won maybe 2 or 3 big games in my life of 24 years so far, they get the benefit of the doubt a lot. But I mean, for a team who had some pretty high expectations this year, they lose to Ohio State. You think, okay, there's still a route for us to get into the playoffs. You lose to Louisville, and that's basically the final nail in the coffin there, unless some crazy things ensue. But it would have been really easy to play against the consensus #1 overall pick in Caleb Williams and roll over to a very talented USC team, even if they don't play defense and they just rely on scoring 60 points a game. But I mean, they went in there and they did their thing, and they had a very convincing win. And now USC seems to be broken as a result of that one. So I think Pitt's going to have a lot of trouble. I'm not going to add much more to what I said or what you said because there isn't much more to add. I just think this Pitt team is not ready to play a Notre Dame team that is meshing the way Notre Dame appears to be meshing now. They got that Louisville loss, and I think they're just really starting to once again find their stride. And I think it's all clicking for them now in the mid to later portion of the season. And I think that's unfortunately bad news for the Panthers come Saturday.
Yeah, and the other thing for Pitt, Notre Dame only allows 16.4 points per game. Pitt's offense at times has struggled. Obviously, Verrier has brought some life into it. And, looking at that Wake game really one last time, the opening drive, Verrier was 7 for 8 with a touchdown to Kenny Johnson to close it off, his freshman wide receiver. And then after that, the offense went quiet. Pitt has done that way too much this year where, they have a drive or two where they look solid. And then the rest of the game, especially the running game. I mean, I know we talked about Phil Dracovic struggled and has been replaced by Verrier, but the running game has really been disappointing for Pitt. And, it's led by Sibo Flemister, who's a former Notre Dame player. So I'm sure he'll get a little bit of a warm welcome back, probably get knocked around in the backfield by Notre Dame. So, the running game has been disappointing, and Notre Dame has just been so solid defensively that it's going to be tough for Pitt to get anything going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Notre Dame's had their moments this season defensively where things didn't go super well, mostly the Louisville game, and I know a lot of people might not be too high on Ohio State, especially after the snooze fest against Penn State. It was one of the most hyped up games of the year that just kind of fell flat. But regardless, that's a top team in the nation, and Notre Dame very well could have won that. Obviously, it ended at the last second, but this Notre Dame defense has shown up and really balled out this year. So yeah, I think that's just going to be really tough for a very young Pitt team. Just to reiterate, I think kind of what we both touched on there. Notre Dame's 20.5-point favorites. I like to think Pitt might sneak into that towards the end of the game. Some garbage time miracle.
It's a good point, but I actually have Notre Dame just covering the spread. I have them winning 38-17. That's a half point, over the spread. So I think Notre Dame takes care of business. I think Pitt, I mean, you might see a little bit of a fight early, but I think it's going to be kind of the opposite. I think Notre Dame is going to pull away a little bit late at the end, and the Fighting Irish win 38-17.
Fair enough. Fair enough. USC kind of snuck back and made things a little closer. One of their early like blowout games. Ah, shoot, I can't remember who it was against, but there's some late. I don't want to call it heroics, but ah, they've given up some touchdowns late in games. I'm struggling to find thoughts today, and I apologize for that. The kitchen. I had to cook steak for the first time ever.
I was gonna say it's because you had that big dinner
I'm
and your
just
focus was on that.
I'm just frazzled. But yeah, I think Notre Dame has let teams kind of make games look closer than they appear, kind of like that thing in the mirror on your car. And I think maybe Pitt finds a way to cover this one. So I'm not saying throw a lot of money on it, but I'm saying maybe throw $5 on it, 10 if you're financially well off, and thank me if it works out. Things aren't working out for the Penguins. Last week we were pretty hopeful, talking about them early in the week, and they've since rattled off 3 straight losses, given up 6, 4, and 4 in those losses, while never scoring more than 3. Yesterday's game was probably the worst of them all. I didn't catch a lot of it, unfortunately, but they looked just not in the right mental space at all. Even Crosby kind of looked like, what's going on here? Things are not looking good. Do we call it early season jitters? Do we call it Sullivan's seat is already hot because it's clear maybe he's the issue? Or do we just say this is just an old team and we should have done a little more to be proactive about getting fresh legs on this team? What are we chalking this up as so far, Nate?
You know, I think it's a good point that this is the oldest team in the NHL. You're gonna have your issues. This team's sometimes just gonna be too slow for some of the young teams, and Dallas is a strong team, and they came in and proved why they are. I mean, Pens went up 1-0, Brian Russ with the goal. Um, but other than that, it was pretty much all Dallas in the second and third period. And Jake Ottinger, I mean, played really well. 39 shots faced, 38 saves. So I mean, he's a good young goalie, and it's always like people are like, oh, why did the Penguins make goalies seem like they're Martin Brodeur and Henrik Lundqvist in their prime? But they're facing some good goalies. I mean, that's just how it is. And Ottinger is another one, and it's tough to beat them. I mean, the one thing though that has stood out to me in stat, wise, that has stood out to me. The Pens are tied second in the league with 35 shots on goal, averaging per game, but they're 22nd in terms of goals per game. That's a big difference. I mean, they're putting a lot of pucks on the net, but they're just not finding ways to finish. The Penguins' top 6 has done pretty much what they are expected to do. Riley Smith has been a nice addition. We talked about that last week. Brian Russ leading the team in goals, but other than that top 6 forward group, the bottom 6 forwards have only had 1 goal, and that's from Zahorna. So this makeshift, restructured bottom 6 that the Penguins, dealt with in the offseason has really not done a whole lot yet. And I don't know when it's going to be the time to see that happen, but they just haven't played well on the bottom 6. And that was an issue last year, and so far it's an issue this year. So the Pens so far 14-6 have been outscored their last 3 games, Detroit, St. Louis, and now against Dallas. So, it's been a tough road so far and not looking super great right now, as you look across the horizon.
Pittsburgh's 2-4. I think that's 7th in the Metro. They have 3 games straight at home beginning tomorrow against the Avalanche, which is going to be a hell of a game. Then they go out west for 3 straight against the Sharks, Ducks, and Kings. How important do you think it is, or how many games do you think they need to win here in this home stretch to have any kind of momentum going way out west there?
Well, surprisingly, I mean, I feel like, for a while, I mean, the Penguins have had success out west. They usually play pretty well on the West Coast swing. But I mean, it starts off right now on this home game versus the Avalanche. I mean, they're undefeated, 6-0. One of just 3 teams left that have not lost, with the Bruins and Vegas, the defending champs. So the Avalanche, I mean, a big time team. I mean, they've been that way for the past 4 or 5 years with Nate McKinnon, at the front of it all. Nate McKinnon, Sidney Crosby, great matchup. But I don't know. I don't think they win this next game versus the Avalanche just with the way they're playing. But they do need to pick up 1 or 2 of those remaining 2 games before they head on the road. Or else they're going to fall down really early, and you don't want to be playing catch up in February and March trying to get back into the playoffs, especially with an older team, because once that season comes down the stretch, in a few months, it's going to be tough to climb back in with the team that you have.
Absolutely. I think, hit the nail on the head. Boom, another dollar in the jar. You got to make the most of this early season games with a team this old. Injuries might be easier to come by. And I think it's just important they make the most out of these games right now. Any final thoughts on the Penguins there, Nate?
No, I just think the bottom six needs to start to figure in. I mean, we've seen, plenty of play, plenty of goals from that top six. I mean, Gino factoring in had that big goal early in St. Louis, but they've just fallen off as the game has gone, which I guess it's not as much as it was last year where they were having a lead heading into the third period and losing. I mean, right now they just can't even get a lead to begin with. So, I mean, the Penguins just need to start finding ways, especially from their bottom six forwards, I think, to factor in and score.
Absolutely. Nate, history's been made today because we have a sponsor. You don't seem as excited as I am, Nate. You seem kind of skeptical.
I'm waiting for it. I'm curious.
As a lot of people know, we're part of Stadium Scene TV, our good friends over there. And thanks to them, Penguins Talk's going to be sponsored every week now. There's no script. And as you can tell, my head is all over the place today. But damn it, I'm going to get us that PR. I'm going to get our great sponsors at Pure Hockey some PR.
Ah, yes.
Pure Hockey, our official affiliate for all future things Penguins. There you can get all the hockey merchandise you need, including skate sticks, protective gear, bags, jerseys, accessories, goalie equipment, and even NHL apparel for your little Penguins fans at home or for Nate's dog.
Hey, I used to shop at Pure Hockey. I might have
you used to, and you're going to again.
Yeah, I'm going to have to. I mean, I'm coaching hockey, so I'm going to need some new equipment. So I'll be visiting Pure Hockey soon.
Absolutely. Hit that link in the bio for more. Pure Hockey, official sponsor of Penguin Talk every single week here on Stranded in Pittsburgh, unless someone from their company listens to the show. And then they're probably going to go, oh no, just kidding. They're cool people. They're not going to say that. But this has been Stranded in Pittsburgh. Nate, any final thoughts on anything going on in the sports world here before we go?
Wow, I actually do have one final thought really to wrap things up, and it's non-Pittsburgh related. It has to do with the Fall Classic that's about to get underway. How about the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Texas Rangers?
How about
representing in the World Series? Two teams that had 100+ losses 2 years ago, now fighting for MLB supremacy. So how about that? I mean, maybe that's a sign of things for the Pirates, maybe. I mean, coming off of back-to-back 100-loss seasons, maybe the future is just as bright, hopefully, for the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Can only hope. The Rangers threw a lot of money, though. Mm-hmm. Threw a lot of money around. Pittsburgh's never going to do that, but Diamondbacks give me hope. They really do. I was going to talk about MLB, too, and how this soft subject of people feel like the best teams aren't in the playoffs anymore.
I don't understand.
I mean, granted, there's only 2 teams now, but I mean, even before that, once we got to the CS, people were like, you need to change this. I get in baseball, you need to be in the swing of things. Pun was not intended, but take it as you will. You need to be in a rhythm, need to be in a groove. Here's the issue with the one-card wild game, and I know people are going to disagree, but the one-card wild game, one-game wild card, excuse me, it just didn't feel right. And I know Pittsburgh kind of came out on the losing end of that a few times back in my my teenage years, but baseball's based on series, and to have an official playoff round be a one-game winner-take-all, it just didn't make much sense to me. It didn't feel right. And I know maybe a counter-argument to that's, well, what happens if there's a Game 7? That's a one-game winner-take-all. You had to play 6 other games to get there. Everyone had their chance to do their thing, do their strategy, whatever. But to me, just the one game in the wild card just didn't feel like a reflection on what it takes to prove who is the better team, especially because in regular season, it's 3-4 games a pop. And to have a playoff round be one game winner take all, just felt kind of boneless, like a boneless wing. The whole thing wasn't there, So anyone who has an issue with it, tell your team to do better. The Astros were fine. So there's no excuse. And it's probably going to piss a lot of Braves fans off that I said that, because they seem to be the ones speaking the loudest on this, which they tend to do. The fans and the radio broadcasters and everybody just really seems to like complaining. And I'm a Pirates fan, so I'm ready for whatever may come of this in case there's Braves fans listening to the last half hour of a show about Pittsburgh sports for some reason. I don't get it. I think it makes perfect sense the way it is. I think it's fun. I think it's competitive. And if your team forgets how to play baseball after a 5-6 day layover, well, then I don't know what to tell you.
Look, I love the underdog story. I'd rather see the Diamondbacks and the Rangers, two teams that were nowhere close 2 years ago. Now they're in the World Series. So, I mean, some of those big time teams, especially in the day and age that, we see in the MLB, whereas, a lot of those top tier teams pay a lot of their players big time money. And then you have these smaller market teams that find ways to win. I mean, I think it's great.
I agree. And I've seen some people saying like, oh, who's going to be watching the World Series this year? Like, who cares? And it's like, America loves an underdog story. It's why you watch March Madness every year. You don't watch March Madness hoping Kansas or Duke or Kentucky is going to win it. You hope number 8 seeded University of Wisconsin River State or whatever goes in there and wins. You want to see some team make a run that's completely improbable and end up being the best. So I don't buy into that argument either. I think it's fun the way it is. And I think we love underdogs here. I know I love an underdog, so I'll be watching. If I can get Fox on my freaking antenna, it's the only channel that doesn't come in, but that's another story for another day. This has been Stranded in Pittsburgh. That's Nate. I'm Nick. I'm not cooking steak. Next week, it's all focus. It's all up here. We'll see you next time.